Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. I do not remember the first time I saw him in real life, because I am not sure I ever did. What I do remember is the night I sat in my dorm room, scrolling through photos from a college football game that a friend had posted online. I had been in a pretty good mood, tired but buzzing from the game, laughing at some of the blurry shots of us screaming in the stands. It was just normal college stuff, one of those nights that does not feel important until something shifts, and suddenly, you cannot look at it the same way again. In one of the pictures, I was in the middle of the frame, my face painted, holding up a hand in some half-finished cheer. And in the corner of the photo, blurred by distance but unmistakably there, was a man. He was tall, with a pale face that looked washed out even though the stadium lights were blasting down on the crowd. His expression was strange, not exactly angry, not happy either, more like nothing at all. Blank. And yet, somehow, he looked directly at me. At first I laughed. It was the kind of laugh you let out when something feels a little off but you do not want to admit it. I even pointed it out to my roommate, joking that I had a secret admirer in the bleachers. She squinted at the screen and shrugged. "Just some random guy," she said. "Creepy, sure, but you were surrounded by thousands of people. Someone was bound to look weird." I let it go, mostly. The human brain sees patterns everywhere, right? And stadiums are full of strangers. But then, a few nights later, I was scrolling through old photos for a completely unrelated reason. I was looking for a group shot from a concert I had gone to years earlier, when I was still in high school. And when I found it, my stomach dropped. There he was. The same man. Same pale face, same expression, same clothes even, standing at the edge of the crowd behind me, partially hidden but visible enough to make my skin crawl. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that maybe my brain was playing tricks, seeing similarities that were not really there. People look alike all the time, right? But the longer I stared, the less convincing that excuse felt. The face was too exact. The height was the same. And the way he seemed to be looking only at me, even in a photo packed with hundreds of people, was impossible to ignore. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that expressionless face lingering just beyond the edge of the frame. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I pulled up old albums online, ones I had not looked at in years. High school prom, birthdays, family holidays. My friends laughing in photo booths, me blowing out candles, cousins and siblings crowded around tables. And in photo after photo, I found him, always in the background. Sometimes barely visible, his face poking through a gap between shoulders. Sometimes clearer, standing at a distance like he had been caught in the act of turning away. But he was always there. I thought maybe I was losing it. Maybe I was obsessing, imagining connections that were not real. But then I came across the Christmas photo from when I was 16. It was our whole family, lined up in front of the tree. My parents, my brother, my grandmother, all smiling stiffly like families do when a camera is pointed at them. And behind us, just off to the side, near the edge of the curtain, there he was again. Same face, same clothes, same blank stare. I felt sick. What made it worse was the realization that he never seemed to change. His face looked exactly the same across years. His clothes, though plain, were always identical. The jacket, the dark shirt, the way his hair was combed neatly but without style. I showed a couple of friends. Most of them squinted, then shrugged, said I was imagining things. One even laughed and told me it was probably a glitch from uploading or some kind of editing trick. But I could see it in their eyes that they were unsettled too, that the idea lingered even after they dismissed it. I stopped mentioning it after a while. The more people brushed it off, the crazier I felt. But inside, the fear only grew. Because here is the truth. I do not remember ever seeing him in person. Not once. I never turned around at a concert and noticed a tall, pale man staring at me. I never felt watched at family dinners or in classrooms. And yet, somehow, he was always there in the photos, always watching. The worst part was not even that he showed up in pictures. It was that I had no memory of anyone else noticing. None of my family members ever turned to point at him. None of my friends cracked a joke about the weird guy in the crowd. In all those moments, he seemed invisible until the photo revealed him later. By the time I closed my laptop that night, my hands were shaking. The silence of my room pressed down on me, too heavy, too sharp. I turned on the television just for background noise, anything to make me feel less alone. But even then, I could not shake the thought. If he had been there for years, watching from the edges, what did he want, and why me? I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of memory, just paranoia. But every creak of the building, every shadow shifting against the walls, made my heart pound faster. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of cameras flashing, of crowds screaming around me, and of one face standing still in the chaos. Blank, pale, unchanging. I woke with a start, gasping, the dream already slipping away, but the unease stayed, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I told myself I would stop looking, that if I just ignored it, the man would vanish back into whatever corner of my imagination I had dragged him from. But of course, I did not stop. Curiosity always wins, even when it feels like poison. The next day, I dug out an old box from the back of my closet, the one full of loose photos and envelopes my mom had handed me when I left for college. Most of them were the kind of blurry childhood pictures you flip through once and never again. But I started spreading them out across the floor of my room, one by one, searching. It did not take long. In a picture of my 5th birthday, I am at the kitchen table, grinning with cake smeared across my cheeks. My cousins are crowded around, some smiling, some crying, the way kids do when sugar and attention are mixed together. And in the background, half cut off by the edge of the frame, is the man. He is not looking at the cake, not at the balloons. His head is tilted just slightly, his pale eyes angled straight toward me. I dropped the photo like it was burning hot. I tried another one. A kindergarten field trip to the zoo. There I am, holding hands with 2 other kids in front of the giraffe enclosure. And in the distance, by the fence, is a tall, thin shape. Same jacket, same face. My chest tightened. My whole childhood. Had he been there the whole time? I tried to remember that day. The sun beating down, the way the giraffes bent their necks low to chew from the feeders. But I could not recall any stranger lurking nearby. No teacher had mentioned it. No other parent had taken issue. Photo after photo, elementary school class pictures, Little League baseball, the church Christmas play where I was a shepherd with a crooked paper beard. In every one there he was, sometimes hidden, sometimes almost obvious, like he had stopped caring if anyone else noticed, and yet no one ever did. I pulled at my hair in frustration, pacing across the room. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly tore one of the photos in half by accident. I felt like I had discovered a stain that kept spreading no matter how hard I scrubbed. At some point, my roommate came back. She stopped in the doorway, looking at the photos scattered like fallen leaves. "What the hell are you doing?" she asked. I told her. I showed her. She crouched, picked up one of the pictures, squinted. "That guy?" she asked. "Yes. Do you see him? He is in every single picture." She stared longer than I expected. Finally, she frowned. "Okay, yeah, that is weird. But maybe it is some uncle or family friend? Someone who just happened to be around?" "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. I would remember. My parents would have told me. And besides, look at him. He hasn't aged. She smirked like I was being dramatic. "Photos don't show age the same way. Maybe you're just obsessing." I wanted to scream. Instead, I gathered the photos back into their box, shoving them inside with enough force that the cardboard bent. That night, I called my mom. I tried to sound casual, asking if there had ever been a tall man who used to come around when I was a kid, someone pale, maybe a family friend or neighbor. She laughed, said she had no idea what I was talking about. No mystery man followed you around, she said. Trust me, I would have noticed. You were glued to my side most of the time anyway. I pressed her harder, but her voice only grew annoyed. Honey, you're scaring yourself for no reason. Stop looking at old pictures if they creep you out so much. After I hung up, I sat in the dark with my phone in my hand, feeling hollow. She was right about one thing. The more I looked, the worse it got. But stopping felt impossible. It was like my brain needed proof, one way or the other, even if proof destroyed me. Later that night, I lay awake scrolling through social media, half numb. I tapped through tagged pictures, not even sure what I was looking for anymore. And there he was again. A photo someone else had taken, years ago, at a high school football game. I was not the focus. I was not even supposed to be in it, just blurred on the edge of the bleachers. But in the same frame, down at the fence, he stood tall and still, not moving, not cheering, just watching. I dropped my phone onto my chest and covered my face with both hands. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I thought about deleting everything, every album, every old picture, pretend none of it existed. But when I finally uncovered my face and glanced at the phone again, something shifted. The latest photo I had opened, the one from the high school game, had refreshed. The app glitched, I thought at first. But no, the background had changed. The man was closer. I sat up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. The figure was still in the frame, but this time he was not down at the fence. He was in the bleachers, 3 rows behind me, leaning forward with that same expressionless stare. My mouth went dry. I closed the app, reopened it. The original version reappeared. He was far away again, standing by the fence, but the image of him closer, leaning in, had seared into my brain. I could still see it when I shut my eyes. That was the moment I realized this was not just a strange detail hidden in old photos. Something was changing, or maybe something was letting me notice him more clearly now. I barely slept. Every time the pipes creaked or the walls groaned, I flinched, expecting to open my eyes and see him in the corner of the room. By morning, I decided I needed proof outside of photos. I needed someone else to notice him at the same time I did. Something in me felt certain that if I could just point fast enough, make someone look before he faded, I would know I was not insane. So I started carrying my phone everywhere. Not just to take pictures, but to test. Crowded coffee shops, the subway, even my own classes. Every time I glanced at a photo afterward, I searched for him. And I found him. Always in the background, still and silent. No one else ever noticed. I do not think I can explain how quickly paranoia eats at you. One week I was scrolling through old photos for fun. The next I was flinching at every sound, scanning every crowd, snapping pictures of strangers just to check later if one of them was him. It became a compulsion. I hated myself for it, but the more I fought it, the more I felt like he was winning. The first time I saw him outside of a photo was not the way I expected. It was not some dramatic sighting across the street or a figure lurking in the distance. It was quiet, almost forgettable, like he wanted me to doubt it. I could not sleep one night. My brain was buzzing, thoughts replaying over and over, looping through images of his pale face in the backgrounds of birthday parties and crowded stadiums. Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying and went for a walk downtown. I told myself fresh air would help, that being around familiar streets would remind me the world was normal. The city was almost empty at that hour. Just the occasional car rolling through lights, the hum of neon from a diner, a couple of people smoking outside a bar. I walked slowly, hands stuffed into my jacket, trying to breathe in the calm. At one point I stopped near a dark shop window to check my phone. Out of habit, I raised the camera and snapped a quick selfie. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to know. When I looked at the photo, my blood ran cold. In the reflection of the glass behind me, he was there. He was not blurred this time, not far away in a crowd. He was standing a few feet behind me, tall and rigid, his head bent slightly like he was watching the top of my head. I spun around so fast I almost dropped the phone. The street behind me was empty. No footsteps, no figure, just an alley leading into shadow. I ran home without thinking. I sat awake the rest of the night, the phone heavy in my hand. I kept zooming in on the reflection, staring at the pale face, the hollow eyes. It was not a trick of light. It was not someone else walking by. It was him. The next morning I told myself I was done. No more photos. No more digging through albums or obsessing over faces. I even thought about deleting everything on my phone, just to stop myself from looking. But by the afternoon, my resolve cracked. I opened the gallery again, and there he was, in every new picture I had taken that week, at the coffee shop, standing by the counter, at the library, framed in the window, at the subway, a pale blur on the platform behind me. He was following me now, not just through memories. The hardest part was that no one else seemed to notice. I showed a picture to a coworker during lunch, desperate for validation. She studied it for a long time, then frowned. "Who's that guy? He's in every picture with you." For a split second, relief shot through me. Someone else saw him. It was real. But that night, I got an email. The sender was an address I did not recognize. No subject line, just a single attachment. My heart pounded as I clicked it open. It was a photo of me at my desk that day, taken from behind. I was sitting exactly where I had been when I showed my coworker. The lighting, the angle, everything matched. Only in this photo he was there too, standing right behind me, grinning. I could not breathe. My eyes blurred with tears. I searched the office later, checked corners, storage closets, even the stairwell. Nothing. I called my coworker, voice shaking, and asked if she had sent it. She swore she had no idea what I was talking about. That night, I locked every window and door in my apartment. I shoved a chair under the knob of my bedroom door, just in case. I lay in bed with the lights on, staring at the ceiling, my chest so tight I thought I might pass out. But exhaustion wins eventually. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding. My phone screen was glowing beside me. I had not touched it. Dozens of new photos filled the gallery. All of me, all taken from the same angle, my head pressed into the pillow, my chest rising and falling with sleep, each one closer than the last. My throat closed. I flipped through them with trembling fingers, my skin crawling. The final picture made me drop the phone onto the bed. It showed his face inches from mine. His eyes wide, empty. His mouth stretched in something between a grin and a grimace. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, listening to every sound in the apartment, the hum of the fridge, the pipes groaning in the walls, nothing else. Eventually, I forced myself to pick up the phone again. I deleted the pictures, but it felt pointless, like erasing footprints in sand while the tide comes in. The next day, I did not go to work. I could not face people, could not sit at that desk with the chance of him behind me. I sat in the apartment with the curtains drawn, jumping every time a car passed or someone walked down the hall. By evening, I realized I had not eaten. I stood in the kitchen, trying to convince myself to cook, when I noticed something taped to the outside of the fridge. It was a Polaroid. I knew instantly it was not mine. I do not own a Polaroid camera. The photo showed me standing exactly where I was now, in the kitchen, one hand on the counter. My face was turned slightly, like I had been caught off guard. And next to me, his hand was reaching for my shoulder. I staggered back so fast I hit the wall. The kitchen spun. I tore the Polaroid down and dropped it, my hands shaking. It was not a photo from the past. It was now. It was the present. And he was closer than ever. I stopped looking at photos for a while after the Polaroid, or at least I tried to. But the problem with something like this is that even when you swear off searching, the world is full of cameras. Other people take pictures, other people tag you, and the harder you try to avoid it, the more paranoid you get about what you are not seeing. For a few days, I tried to live normally. I went to work, kept my head down, told myself not to obsess. But every time someone lifted a phone in my direction, even casually, I felt a wave of panic. My chest would tighten, and I would imagine him there again, just out of sight, waiting to be captured in the background. I started noticing other things too. My dog barked at the corners of rooms where nothing stood. I caught my reflection in windows and thought I saw movement just behind me, only for it to vanish when I spun around. And then there were the nights. The nights became unbearable. I would lock every door, wedge chairs beneath the knobs, double-check the windows, and still I woke up to find small changes. A cabinet left open that I knew I had closed. A cup sitting on the counter when it had been in the sink. Once, my phone was resting on the floor beside the bed. The screen facing upward, camera app open, as if someone had been using it while I slept. I told myself, maybe I was sleepwalking, maybe I was doing these things and forgetting, but the truth felt heavier than that, pressing down on me. I remembered the last photo, his face inches from mine. How could I forget? I tried to tell a coworker again, more desperately this time. I pulled her aside, my voice shaking, and begged her to listen. She humored me, asking questions, nodding, but the more I explained, the more ridiculous it sounded. A man who appears in every photo of my life, never aging, sometimes moving closer. A faceless email, a Polaroid I never took. It sounded like paranoia, delusion, or worse. She finally sighed and said gently, I think you should talk to someone, like a professional. Maybe this is stress. Maybe you're seeing patterns that aren't there. I wanted to scream in her face, but I swallowed it down, nodded, and said I would think about it. That night I sat alone in my apartment with the curtains drawn, the television playing static because I was too afraid to change the channel. I thought about her words, a professional. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was unraveling. But then my phone buzzed. It was another email, same unknown address, no subject. This time it was not a photo. It was a short video. My stomach lurched as I pressed play. The video showed my living room, recorded from an angle near the ceiling. The quality was grainy, but the furniture was unmistakable. In the frame, I could see myself sitting on the couch, head bowed, scrolling through my phone. The video lasted maybe 30 seconds, just me shifting, adjusting, picking up a glass of water. And then, near the end, he appeared. The man stepped into the frame from the left, slow and deliberate. He stood directly behind me, his pale face bent down, close enough that if the me in the video had turned, our eyes would have met. But I never turned. I just sat there, scrolling, oblivious. The video cut to black. I dropped the phone like it was poison. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the corners of the living room, scanning for cameras, tearing apart shelves and vents. I found nothing. But the video had to come from somewhere. Someone was watching me, recording me, sending proof that he was closer than I ever realized. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back to the wall, every light on, the baseball bat from the closet across my lap. The next morning, bleary-eyed and shaking, I tried to convince myself it was some elaborate prank. Maybe someone had access to my photos. Maybe they were editing things, staging them. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. No one else could make him appear in pictures from decades ago. No one else could explain why he never changed. Later that week, I caught my reflection in a shop window while walking home. For just a second, I thought I saw him standing directly beside me in the glass. I turned so fast my neck popped, but the sidewalk was empty. I laughed out loud, a sharp broken sound, just to convince myself I was still tethered to reality. But the worst was still coming. One night, I finally worked up the courage to go through my photos again, determined to find answers. I sat with the box of old prints spread across the floor, my phone beside me. I told myself I would catalog every instance, make a timeline, maybe show it to someone who could help. But when I reached for the oldest picture I had, a baby photo my mom had taken when I was only a few months old, I froze. It was him. He was standing in the background of that picture too. I could not breathe. I dropped the photo, hands trembling, bile rising in my throat. He had been there from the very beginning. Before I could walk, before I could talk, before I even knew how to notice. This was not a stalker, not a prank, not a coincidence. This was something else. I shoved the photos back into the box, slammed the lid, and shoved it into the back of my closet. But that did nothing. I could still see his pale face burned into my mind, unchanged across decades, unblinking, patient. That night as I lay in bed I heard something. 3 faint clicks, almost like the shutter of a camera, coming from the dark corner of the room. I did not look. I buried my head under the pillow, shaking, whispering to myself that it was nothing. But deep down I knew. He was no longer just in the photos. He was here. I thought the worst part was seeing him in old photos. But that was nothing compared to feeling him in the room. Once that line was crossed, nothing felt safe anymore. The box of pictures stayed buried in the closet, but it did not matter. I no longer needed to search for him. He was everywhere, whether I looked or not. The first morning after those faint shutter sounds, I walked into the kitchen to find my phone propped against a mug, camera facing the hallway. The screen showed that the recording app had been running all night. I never set it up. My stomach turned to stone. I deleted the file without watching it, because some part of me knew what I would see, and I could not handle more proof. At work, people started commenting that I looked sick. I did not bother with excuses. How could I explain the circles under my eyes came from listening to a presence move through my apartment every night? Or that the reason my hands shook was not caffeine, but the memory of seeing my own baby photos with him already in the frame. I told myself I needed evidence, real, solid evidence I could show someone else. Maybe then I would not sound insane, so I bought a cheap second-hand camera from a pawn shop, thinking that if I left it running on a tripod, maybe I could catch him. That night, I set it up in the living room. The little red light blinked steadily. I sat in the chair across from it, bat on my lap again, forcing myself to stay awake. Hours passed. My eyelids grew heavy. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is jerking awake to the sound of the camera shutting off. When I checked the recording, my blood iced over. The footage showed me sitting exactly as I remembered, bat across my knees, eyes drooping, and then, at some point, he entered the frame. He stepped into the room from the left, exactly the way he had in the emailed video, only this time it was clearer, sharper. His face was pale but not blurred. His mouth was twisted into something that was not quite a smile. He walked to where I sat and leaned down, his face level with mine. For nearly a minute, the two of us stayed like that, me asleep, him bent over, studying me. Then he reached out one long hand and pressed a finger to the bat. The wood shifted slightly in my lap. I felt sick. I rewound the video again and again, watching his finger nudge the bat, confirming it was real. He could touch things. He could move things. I deleted the footage, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I could not stand having it exist, sitting there like bait on my hard drive. The next day I skipped work again. My boss called twice before giving up. I sat in my apartment with the blinds shut tight, lights off, silence pressing down like a weight. At one point, I thought I heard someone walking in the hallway outside. Slow, steady steps that paused right outside my door. I held my breath until they faded. When I finally worked up the nerve to peek into the hallway, it was empty. But on the floor, just beneath the crack of my door, someone had slid another Polaroid. This one showed me sleeping in my bed. Same angle as before, same pale face, inches from mine. Only this time, his hand was on my shoulder. I dropped the photo like it burned and kicked it across the room. I realized then that it was not just about photos anymore. He wanted me to know he was close. He wanted me to see what he could do. That night I did not even bother pretending to sleep. I sat upright in bed, lights blazing, bat beside me. I stared at the door, daring it to open. Hours ticked by, my vision blurred with exhaustion. At some point I must have drifted again, because when I blinked awake, the lights were out, all of them. The switch by the bed had been flipped. My throat closed. I groped blindly for the bat, but my hand met empty sheets. Something moved in the corner of the room, a faint sound, like fabric shifting. I tried to force my eyes to adjust, but the dark felt thicker than usual, almost alive. Then, from somewhere in that blackness, came the faintest click, like a shutter. I froze. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to run, but I lay perfectly still. If he was going to take a picture, let him. Maybe that was all he wanted. When the lights flicked back on, by themselves, the bat was leaning against the wall, and a fresh Polaroid lay on my chest. It showed me in bed exactly as I was, wide-eyed and terrified. He was not in the photo this time, just me, staring into the lens like a trapped animal. The message was clear. He did not need to be in the picture anymore. He was the one taking them. The next morning, I smashed the pawn shop camera and threw my phone in the trash. I unplugged my laptop, pulled the battery out, hid it in a drawer. I thought maybe if I stopped giving him ways to appear, he would fade. But that night, I heard scratching on the walls. Not rats, not pipes, long deliberate strokes, like someone dragging a nail across the plaster. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, whispering nonsense just to drown it out. The scratching moved from wall to wall, circling me, patient. When silence finally came, I thought maybe he had given up. But in the morning, the walls were covered with faint marks, not random scratches, lines. Dozens of rectangles, like frames, like photographs. I stopped going to work altogether. I stopped answering texts. I pulled the curtains closed and kept every light in the apartment on. It did not matter. The walls were still covered in those faint frames, scratched over and over, until every surface felt like a gallery waiting to be filled. At first I tried to paint over them, but by the next morning, they reappeared, neat and deliberate. I started sleeping in the living room, then on the floor, then not at all. It felt pointless to fight anymore. One evening, maybe a week into this, I heard a knock on the door. Just 3 soft taps. My whole body froze. I had stopped opening the door for anyone, but this was different. It was patient, rhythmic, like a metronome ticking out my pulse. I waited, barely breathing, until the knocking stopped. I thought maybe it was a neighbor, but when I checked the peephole, no one was there. Just the empty hallway stretching on forever. When I turned back into the apartment, I saw a new Polaroid sitting on the coffee table. I had not heard anyone enter. I had not heard the door move, but it was there all the same. The photo was of me, at that exact moment, standing in front of the peephole, my eye pressed against it. That was when I broke. I called my mom. I told her everything, every detail, my voice cracking and frantic. I expected her to hang up, or worse, to laugh, but she went very quiet. Then she said, in a voice I barely recognized, "I wondered when you would notice him." Her words knocked the breath out of me. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "You told me I was imagining things." "I had to," she said. "It starts earlier if you acknowledge him. The longer you ignore him, the longer he stays in the background. But he always comes closer eventually." My knees went weak. I sat down hard on the couch. "You knew? You've seen him too?" "Not me," she whispered. "Your grandfather. He used to talk about it, the man who showed up in photographs. My father never believed him, said it was just paranoia. But when I was cleaning out the attic years ago, I found boxes of pictures. Every single one had that man in it, always watching, always waiting." I could barely process what she was saying. My skin prickled cold. "What does he want?" I asked. Silence stretched on the other end. Finally, she said, "I think he wants to be remembered, to exist in more than just pictures. But the closer he gets, the more he takes. That is why your grandfather, well, he did not die the way the papers said." Her voice cracked then, and I knew she would not say more. After that, I could not sit still. I tore through the apartment, digging up every Polaroid, every printed photo, every scrap of evidence I had. I stuffed them into a bag, hauled them down to the dumpster, and set them on fire. I watched until the flames reduced everything to ash. For a moment, I felt lighter. Maybe this was how I ended it. But when I came back upstairs, the apartment walls were covered with new Polaroids, taped neatly inside each scratched rectangle. Dozens of them, hundreds. Every one was of me. Me brushing my teeth, me sleeping, me cooking, me curled on the floor crying. Each one taken from a different angle, as if I lived inside a house made of cameras. And in some of them, he was there too, closer than ever, his pale face leaning into the frame, his hand reaching, his expression as blank as always. I ripped them down in a frenzy, screaming, tearing the walls bare, but more appeared as fast as I could destroy them. I gave up, collapsed on the floor, sobbing into my hands. That was when the thought came, the thing that had been pressing on me ever since my mom's call. Maybe this was never about the photos themselves. Maybe it was about me. He had been following me since childhood, since birth, maybe even before. The photos were just proof, a way for him to mark his presence. If he wanted to step out fully, to stop lurking in frames, there was nothing I could do. But if he wanted to be remembered, maybe I could take that power back. I did something reckless then. I set up a chair in the center of the room, placed my phone on a tripod, and sat down facing the camera. I hit record, and then I spoke. I told the whole story, from the first time I noticed him in a crowd photo to the Polaroids taped across my walls. I held up the pictures, one after another, showing them to the lens. I described the sound of the shutters at night, the scratching frames, the way my mom's voice had broken when she admitted she knew, and then I said his name. Not because I knew it, but because I gave him one. I called him the Watcher. I said it out loud, over and over, daring him to step out, daring him to take me if that was what he wanted. The air grew heavy. The lights flickered. For a second I thought I saw movement just behind me, tall and pale and waiting. My whole body went cold. But I kept speaking, louder and louder, forcing my voice to fill the room. And then, suddenly, it was quiet. The light steadied. The walls were bare again. Every Polaroid, every frame, gone. I sat there shaking, unable to move. When I checked the recording later, the footage showed only me, sitting in the chair, talking to an empty room. No flickering lights, no pale figure, no proof. But since that night, the photos have stopped. No Polaroids under the door. No frames scratched into the walls. No pale face in old albums. Sometimes I think I ended it by naming him. Sometimes I think I just gave him exactly what he wanted. I do not take pictures anymore. I do not let people photograph me. My social media is gone. My phone stripped of every camera. But every so often, when I pass a mirror, I get the feeling I am not alone in the reflection. And I wonder if one day someone else will find me in the background of their photos, staring blankly, unchanged, waiting to be remembered. I never really bought into the whole lizard people thing. You know, the idea that some shape-shifting reptilian beings are walking among us in human skin, running the world behind the scenes. I always figured that was internet nonsense, the kind of thing you say half-jokingly at a bar after too many drinks. But then something happened. Something I still can't explain, no matter how many times I replay it in my head. It was a few months back, Late spring, early summer. I had taken a solo trip out to Sedona. I needed to clear my head, get away from everything. I had just gone through a rough breakup. Work was stressing me out, and I figured a few days of hiking and unplugging from the noise might do me some good. Sedona's one of those places that feels different when you're there. The colors of the rocks, the silence between the trees, the way the air feels thicker somehow, almost like it's carrying a charge. People say there's energy in those canyons. At the time, I didn't believe that either. Now I'm not so sure. I had parked at a small trailhead about 15 minutes outside town. It wasn't one of the popular spots. I'd found it in a forum for off-the-map hikes and figured it would be quiet. I packed water, a granola bar, my old boots, and set off around 10 in the morning. The trail was dry and narrow, cutting through low brush and the occasional red rock outcropping. There was hardly any wind, the kind of stillness that makes every little sound stand out. About an hour in, I hit a spot where the trail curved around a small hill. On the other side was a cluster of cacti, taller than me, spread out like nature's attempt at a privacy fence. That's when I saw him. A man, just standing there, in a full business suit. It was so out of place I actually laughed at first. Like, what was this guy doing out here dressed like that? He was stiff, almost like a mannequin. No backpack, no hat. Just standing perfectly still behind one of the cacti, like he was trying to hide but not really trying. You know when someone's pretending not to be seen, but they're doing it in such an obvious way that it just makes them more noticeable? I slowed down immediately. Something about it didn't sit right. I told myself he was just lost, or maybe part of some weird photo shoot. But the longer I looked, the stranger it got. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't checking his phone, wasn't even looking around. Just standing, hands at his sides, like he had been frozen in place. I stopped and knelt down to tie my boot, not because I needed to, but because I suddenly didn't want to get any closer. I kept my head down but watched him from the corner of my eye. That's when it happened. He turned slightly. Not his body, just his head. And in that moment, I swear to you, I saw his eyes change. 1 second, normal. The next, the pupils narrowed into vertical slits. Not like a cat, like a lizard. Thin, sharp, deliberate. It wasn't a trick of the light. I've seen what that looks like. This was different. His whole expression changed, like the muscles in his face weren't used to moving that way. I felt this wave of panic hit me, not fear exactly. More like every instinct I had was suddenly screaming to stay still, to not make a sound, like I was prey and it had noticed me. He stared at me for a long few seconds. And then, like nothing had happened, he turned and walked away. Calm, casual, no rush. He walked like a guy who had just stepped out of a boardroom, not someone who had just revealed something impossible to a stranger in the desert. As he got farther away, he looked totally normal again. Just a guy in a suit walking into the canyon like it was the most natural thing in the world. But I couldn't shake what I had seen. The way his eyes changed. The way he had just stood there, like he was waiting for something, or watching for someone. I waited until he was completely out of sight. Then I stood up and started walking the other way, not running. I didn't want to attract attention. I just walked, fast and steady, back the way I came. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I got to the trailhead, My car was the only one in the lot. That made it worse somehow. I sat there for a long time with the engine running, trying to convince myself that I'd just seen a guy with weird contacts, maybe a prank, maybe my mind playing tricks on me in the heat. But it wasn't hot. And it wasn't a trick. I know what I saw. I drove back to town and didn't say a word to anyone. I checked out of my motel the next morning and left early. I haven't been back since. I didn't tell anyone for weeks, not friends, not family. Every time I thought about bringing it up, I imagined the look I'd get. Like I'd just confessed to believing in Bigfoot, or said the moon was fake. But it's been sitting in the back of my mind ever since, like a splinter you can't get out. I started reading more after that, quietly, online. I didn't search for lizard people because that brings up the usual junk, but I looked into sightings, descriptions of strange individuals, reports of people whose faces glitch just for a second. Most of it sounds like nonsense. But every now and then someone describes the eyes. Always the eyes. Vertical slits, a flash of green, no emotion, just stillness. I don't know what I saw out there. I'm not saying it was a shapeshifter or some reptilian overlord, but I know what I felt, and it wasn't human. And ever since that day, I've had this sense like something saw me too, like I was just one of 100 hikers walking through the red dust. But in that moment, something looked back and remembered me. After that day in Sedona, things didn't go back to normal. I tried to pretend they did. I tried to convince myself it was a weird one-off thing. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe it was just a guy with strange eyes and a bad sense of social cues. I even tried laughing about it later, like it was some bizarre desert hallucination. But deep down, I knew what I saw. And I knew that it had seen me. I live alone, a small place, nothing special, just a 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of a quiet town. The kind of spot where you hear the garbage truck coming long before it gets to your street, and you wave to the same 3 neighbors every morning whether you mean to or not. It's peaceful. Or at least it used to be. A few nights after I got back, I was sitting out on my back porch with a beer in my hand, staring at the trees that separate my yard from the old walking trail beyond. I like being outside when it's quiet. The stars were clear that night, no wind, just that deep, hollow stillness that makes you feel like the whole world is holding its breath. That's when I noticed it. Movement just beyond the tree line. At first I thought it was a deer. Happens all the time around here. They'll sneak out and rustle the bushes, maybe step onto someone's lawn for a snack. But this was different. The movement stopped too quickly, like it froze the second I noticed it. I squinted into the dark, trying to make out the shape. And then I saw it. A silhouette. Tall, standing still, too still, just like before. I couldn't make out the details, but I swear whoever it was, they were facing me. Not walking, not crouched, just standing, half hidden behind the trees, watching. I stared back for maybe 10 seconds, didn't move, didn't blink. My stomach tightened, that cold feeling crawling up the back of my neck. You know how you just know when someone's looking at you? It was like that, but worse, heavier. I stood up slowly, not wanting to draw attention, and went inside. Locked the door, turned off the lights, didn't even finish the beer. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Probably just someone cutting through the trail, maybe lost. But I couldn't shake that feeling, that same feeling I'd had in Sedona. Like I wasn't looking at a person. I was looking at something that wanted to be seen. The next morning, I walked down to the trail just to check. It had rained lightly the night before, enough to leave patches of soft mud. I figured if someone had been out there, maybe there would be footprints. There were. Sort of. I found a few impressions near the tree line, not full prints, not deep, just enough to suggest someone had been there. But the shape was wrong. The spacing was strange, too long between steps. Like whoever had been walking didn't move the way we do. I tried to brush it off again. Could have been an animal. Could have been my imagination making too much of some uneven ground. But I stopped going out on the porch at night after that. A couple days later, I was walking through the grocery store, just doing a normal run. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee, nothing fancy. I wasn't even thinking about Sedona at that point. I had almost convinced myself that I was overreacting, that nothing had followed me, that I was safe. Then I turned down the cereal aisle. He was standing at the other end. Same height, same build, dressed casual this time, jeans and a button-up, blending in. But it was him. I don't know how I knew. I just did. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't holding anything. Just standing there, looking at the shelves like he didn't know what anything was. Then he looked at me. And I saw them again. Those eyes. Only for a second, a flicker, but they changed. From round and human to vertical and inhuman. Just like in the desert. I dropped the basket, didn't even think about it, just turned around and walked out. I don't know if anyone saw. I don't know if he followed. I got in my car and drove straight home. After that, the dreams started. They weren't nightmares exactly, more like scenes. Always the same. I'm back in Sedona, standing on that trail, and he's there behind the cactus. But I can't move. I'm frozen, like my limbs are made of stone. He walks toward me slowly, calmly, and when he reaches me, he doesn't speak. He just leans in and stares. Eyes bright, slitted, unblinking. I always wake up before anything else happens. One night I woke up to find the back door unlocked. I'm obsessive about locking up. Always have been. But that night, I swear I remembered doing it before bed. Still, I chalked it up to a mistake. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe it wasn't what I was starting to fear. But the next night, it happened again. Not just unlocked. Wide open. And this time, there were marks on the floor. Thin, curved scratches on the hardwood like something heavy had slid just inside and stopped. I didn't call the cops. What was I going to tell them? That a lizard man walked through my yard and came inside to stare at me while I slept. I cleaned up the scratches, locked the door, and sat up all night with a flashlight in my hand. I haven't slept more than a couple hours at a time since. I don't know what he wants. I don't know if he's following me or if there's more than one of them. All I know is that he saw me in Sedona, and now, somehow, he's here. Watching. Waiting. And I don't think he's alone. I started to notice them more often after that. Not just the one from Sedona, others. People who looked normal until you looked too close. Something about the way they moved, the way they stood still for just a little too long. The way their heads turned before their bodies, the way their eyes didn't quite match the light around them. You know when someone seems familiar but wrong, like a wax figure or a mannequin that's just lifelike enough to be uncomfortable? That's what it felt like. The first time I saw another one, it was at a gas station about 30 minutes from my house. I had driven out late at night because I couldn't sleep. Figured I'd grab a coffee and try to clear my head. I walked inside and immediately noticed a man standing by the coolers, just standing, not looking at anything, not holding a drink. His hands were in his pockets, shoulders too straight. He wasn't moving. I didn't get close, just watched from the corner of my eye while pretending to pick out a snack. He turned toward me slowly, almost like he knew I was looking. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. That's when I saw it again. That flicker, that shimmer. His pupils narrowing into slits, not like a trick of the light, but like something his body couldn't quite hide in time. I dropped the coffee and walked out. Didn't look back. Drove straight home and checked the locks 3 times before I sat down. This wasn't just about that one guy anymore. There were more of them. And they weren't hiding anymore. They were showing up in places they shouldn't be. A woman at the post office who blinked too slowly. A man outside the hardware store who stood without moving for 10 full minutes. A kid sitting alone at a bus stop, smiling without blinking as cars passed. Always watching, and always gone by the time I tried to get a second look. I started keeping track. Not just what I saw, but when and where. I had a notebook full of entries: time, location, behavior. Every sighting seemed random, but I knew better. I could feel a pattern behind it, even if I couldn't see it yet. They weren't just wandering, they were monitoring. I stopped going out unless I had to. Grocery runs became once a week, early mornings when the stores were quiet. I changed up my routes, left my phone at home half the time. I didn't want to be traced, even though I had no real proof they were tracking me. But it didn't matter. They still found me. One night, I woke up to a sound outside, not loud, just wrong, like something scraping softly across the ground. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a shadow standing at the edge of my yard, not moving, just watching the house. I couldn't make out details, but I knew it wasn't an animal. I stayed completely still. It didn't move. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Not walked away. Gone. Like it had never been there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat in bed with the lights off, holding a flashlight and a kitchen knife. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds paranoid. But when you've seen what I've seen, when you know there's something out there wearing human skin and walking around like it belongs here, you stop caring what sounds crazy. I tried to tell someone once, my friend Jordan. We go back years, and he's always been open-minded. I figured if anyone might believe me, it would be him. We met for coffee, and I laid it all out. The guy in the suit, the slitted eyes, the sightings, the notebook, everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just looked at me for a long time and said, "You need to be careful." I asked him what he meant, and he just shook his head. Then he leaned in and said, "They're not all the same." That froze me. I asked him how he knew about any of this. He didn't answer. Just looked down at his coffee like he'd said too much. I tried pressing him, but he changed the subject. A few minutes later, he stood up, patted me on the shoulder, and said, "Just trust your instincts." I haven't seen him since. Called him a few times, no answer. Went by his apartment, empty, cleaned out, like he had never lived there. That was 2 weeks ago. Now I'm alone again. Except I'm not really. They're still out there. I still see them. Every few days someone new, a face in a crowd that holds eye contact just a little too long, a jogger who runs without sweating, a kid in the park staring up at the sky like he's waiting for something to arrive. I don't think they're hunting me exactly. I think they're waiting, watching to see what I'll do. If I'll tell more people, if I'll try to expose them, if I'll run, or if I'll forget. But I won't. I wrote everything down, and I keep writing, because the more I see them, the more I realize something else. They don't want to be found. But they're not hiding either. And that scares me more than anything. I started to wonder if they were letting me see them. That thought settled in one night while I was sitting in my living room, lights off, just staring at the front window. I had been there for almost an hour, watching the empty street, waiting for something to move, and nothing did. But the stillness felt too clean, too staged. Like the absence of movement had been placed there on purpose, like someone wanted me to notice the silence. I didn't used to think this way. I wasn't some paranoid guy chasing shadows. But when you see something you shouldn't, and then it starts showing up in the corner of your vision again and again, it changes you. You start seeing patterns in everything. You start thinking maybe the quiet isn't natural. Maybe it's the gap between two things you're not supposed to notice. I hadn't slept a full night in over a week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The first one, the man behind the cactus, his eyes changing, that perfect stillness. The way he turned and walked away like he was resetting a pose, that image burned itself into my brain. I kept thinking about what Jordan had said. They're not all the same. I didn't know what that meant, but it stayed with me. Were there different types? Were some more human than others? Were some of them not pretending anymore? One afternoon, I tried to get answers. I started digging online again, deeper than before. Not just forums and late-night videos, but old government documents, local news clippings, anything that might feel connected. Most of it was garbage. Crazy theories. But every once in a while I'd find something that clicked. A 1970s police report from a desert town in Arizona about a man found wandering naked with scaly skin and no fingerprints. He vanished from the hospital within hours. A blurry security photo from a Nevada airport showing a person with eyes too large for their face and a shadow that didn't match the light source. A classified file that was supposedly leaked from an air base. The document had been redacted into near uselessness, but one line stood out. Subject appears fully integrated. Displays advanced mimicry and sustained behavioral masking. That last line chilled me. Sustained behavioral masking. That's what they're doing. They're blending in. Not just standing still behind cacti or lurking outside houses. They're walking among us, in line at grocery stores, sitting on buses, standing behind counters, watching, listening, gathering something. I started to notice them doing things that felt almost like practice. There was a woman at the local hardware store who walked down one aisle, paused halfway, turned around without picking anything up, then walked back the same way. She did that 4 times in a row. Like she was testing something, then she looked at me and smiled too wide. Another time I saw a man at a diner stir his coffee clockwise for 10 straight minutes without drinking it. He was staring at the window, unblinking. Then he stood up and left, didn't pay, didn't speak to the waitress, just walked out. They are learning, I thought, studying us. And then a darker thought came in. Or maybe they're not learning. Maybe they already know everything, and what we're seeing is something else. Something breaking down. I went back to the notebook and started reviewing the entries. Times, locations, descriptions. I circled every sighting where the behavior seemed off, like they were glitching. I noticed that they were happening more frequently. Not just once a week. Now it was every other day. And they were getting closer. One evening, I was pulling into my driveway when I saw someone standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Just standing. They weren't facing me, just looking at one of the streetlights. I watched from the car for a full minute. They didn't move. I got out and walked slowly to my front door, never taking my eyes off them. They didn't turn around. I went inside and locked everything. 15 minutes later, I looked outside again. They were gone. That's when I started hearing the noise. It's hard to describe, not a sound exactly, more like a pressure behind the ears, like when you're on a plane and your ears won't pop. It would come in short pulses, mostly at night, usually when everything else was quiet. And every time it started, I'd feel the air in the room change, heavier, tighter. It would last a few minutes, then fade. The first few times I thought it was in my head. But then I caught Max reacting too. He'd perk up, look toward the window, and whine. Always at the same time. Always when that pressure hit. I started marking the times in the notebook. It wasn't random. The intervals were consistent, almost like a signal. I started thinking about Sedona again, about the silence in the canyon, the way the man stood so still. The moment his pupils shifted, I realized that silence felt just like this pressure. Like it wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. I dug out the maps from that trip. I traced the trail I had taken. I remembered the spot with the cactus, the bend in the trail. I found it on the map, marked it. Then I noticed something else. There were other reports, scattered across different forums, from people describing similar sightings. But when I pinned the locations down, a pattern started to emerge. A rough circle, all centered around that same part of Sedona, almost like a radius, a zone. I measured the distance from that central point to my house, roughly 190 miles. The last time I measured, I was well outside that. Now I was inside it. They were expanding. The sightings, the signals, the presence. I think whatever is happening started there. Maybe it came from underground. Maybe it came from somewhere else. But it's growing now. And more people are seeing them. Or maybe more people are being seen. I don't know which is worse. I stopped pretending I was okay after that. Up until then, I had been trying to live like everything was normal. I still went out for groceries. I still answered texts from friends, though less often. I tried to work, tried to read, tried to sleep, but the more I noticed them, the more I saw behind the curtain, the harder it became to act like I hadn't seen anything at all. Once you start seeing them, you can't unsee them. It wasn't just the man in the canyon anymore. It wasn't even just the one outside my house or the woman in the store. It was everywhere. Small things. People walking in perfect sync. Blinking out of rhythm. Smiling too long after the conversation was over. People who seemed human right up until the moment they didn't. I started staying home most of the time. Max wouldn't leave my side. He followed me from room to room, laid by the door at night, and growled at the windows more than once. He never used to do that. I covered the windows with blackout curtains. I unplugged my smart devices, tossed my webcam into a drawer, and shut off my phone for hours at a time. I kept thinking about that low-pressure hum I had been feeling, like a frequency only a part of me could detect, a pulse in the air, not quite sound, not quite thought. I needed answers, real ones. So I went back to the only person who had ever said anything that sounded like he understood. Jordan. I had not seen him in weeks. After that strange coffee shop conversation, he had vanished. I had driven by his place more than once. Empty. I left a note on the door once, just in case. No response. But that day, I got lucky. I was driving down a back road near the edge of town when I spotted him. He was walking alone along the shoulder, hands in his pockets, head down. I pulled over and called his name. He flinched like he didn't recognize it at first, then walked over to the car and got in without a word. I didn't ask where he had been. I didn't have to. He looked different. Not sick, not exactly, just tired. Like he hadn't had real rest in a long time. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said it. "They know you saw them." I asked him how he knew. He said, "Because you're still here." I waited. He finally looked at me. "If you were a threat, you wouldn't be. Still here, I mean." That chilled me more than anything else he had said. I asked him what they were, not in theory, not in vague metaphors. I asked him directly, "What are they?" He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "They've always been here, but something's changed." I pressed him, "What changed?" He said, "They used to hide, now they don't." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you know why they're always so still?" I shook my head. He said, "Because movement is a human trait. We shift, we fidget, we adjust. They copy everything else, but they forget the small stuff." I asked how he knew all this. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook, like mine, worn, thick with notes and loose pages. He handed it to me. Inside were dozens of entries, descriptions, dates, places, drawings. Eyes. So many sketches of those vertical pupils. One page near the middle caught my attention. It was a hand-drawn map. A circle, just like the one I had drawn on mine. A central point near Sedona, radiating out. Different zones, different levels of activity. And a note scrawled across the bottom. Integration increasing, estimated threshold approaching. I asked what that meant. He said, "They're not just showing up more, they're syncing with something. Something was coming, or being prepared for." He didn't say what. He looked out the window, eyes unfocused. "I don't think they're waiting anymore," he said. "They're replacing." That word sat heavy in the air. I asked him if he thought I had been replaced. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Not yet." That was not comforting. I drove him back to where I had found him. He said he couldn't stay in one place for too long. He said they track routines. Predictable behavior makes you easier to swap. Before he got out, he said one last thing. "If they ever look like someone you know, don't talk to them, don't follow them, don't ask questions, just leave." Then he was gone. I sat in the car for a long time, notebook in my lap, stomach tight. If he was right, and I think he was, then I had already let too much slip. I had watched, I had tracked, I had remembered. I think they knew I was watching. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom window. Slow, measured, one step at a time. I sat up in bed and didn't move. Max was already awake, ears back, a low growl in his throat. I reached for the flashlight beside the bed, clicked it on, and waited. The steps stopped. Silence. I waited for 10 full minutes before moving. When I finally looked outside, the yard was empty. No prints, no shadows, nothing. But the gate was open, and I had locked it. The next day I packed a bag, essentials only. I put both notebooks in a plastic sleeve and tucked them at the bottom. I left a note on the kitchen table, just in case. Not that anyone would come looking, but it felt right. I drove north, away from the radius, away from the zone. I didn't know where I was going yet, only that I had to keep moving, because something was coming, and if I stayed in one place, I might not be the one who stayed. I kept driving. No destination, no map, just a direction, north. That first night I slept in the truck, parked off a side road behind a row of trees where no one would see the glow of my dash. Max stayed curled on the seat beside me, head up, alert even while he dozed. Every snap of a branch or rustle in the dark made my breath catch, but nothing came. No footsteps, no watchers. The notebook sat on the passenger side floor. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. Everything I needed from it was already burned into my brain. In the morning I drove again. Small towns, gas stations that looked like they hadn't changed since the 1970s, diners with handwritten menus and coffee that tasted like cardboard. I kept my head down. Didn't stay anywhere longer than a few hours. If someone stared too long, if someone blinked too slow, I was gone. At first I thought maybe I'd find more people like Jordan, people who had seen what I'd seen, maybe even people who had answers. I kept an eye out for signs, symbols scrawled on light poles, QR codes that didn't scan, people in booths talking in hushed tones about eyes that didn't blink right. But nothing ever came. Just me, Max, and the road. And somewhere in the silence the fear started to shift. It didn't go away. It just changed shape. I wasn't scared of being found anymore. I was scared that I might be the only one left who remembered. Because that's the thing I figured out too late. They don't need to erase you. They just need to copy you well enough that no one notices you're gone. I stopped one night at a rest area in the mountains, snow on the ground, air so clean it hurt to breathe. I took Max for a walk in the trees. The trail wound behind the building and disappeared into a patch of pine. No one else was around. Then I saw something up ahead. Another figure. Standing still. No movement. Just a man in a dark jacket, hands by his sides, staring off into the trees. I froze. Max did too. No growl this time. Just a low whine. Tail down. I was about to turn around when the man spoke. "You can stop running." His voice was calm. Too calm. Like it had been practiced. Like he'd been rehearsing those exact words for a long time. I didn't move. He turned around slowly. His face looked human. Familiar even. That was the worst part. There was something almost like me in the shape of his jaw. The curve of his eyebrows. But his eyes were wrong. Too still. I reached for the flashlight in my pocket, clicked it on, and shined it in his face. His pupils didn't shrink. He flinched not from the light, but from the noise of the switch. That's when I knew. He wasn't here to hurt me, not like that. He was here to copy me. I didn't say anything, just backed away slowly, hands still on the light. He didn't follow. Didn't move at all. I walked back to the truck, heart hammering. Max didn't take his eyes off the trees until we pulled away. I drove until the sun came up. That was the last time I saw one of them. I don't know why. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was the final check before they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. But after that, the sightings stopped. The dreams faded. The pressure in the air disappeared. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I found a town further upstate, not too small, not too quiet. A place with enough strangers that no one asks why you're there, but not enough to feel watched. I rented a room in a little house just outside of town, fixed it up, cleaned the gutters, put my name on the mailbox. I started writing again, not just notes, full pages, everything I remembered, everything I saw, not to post it, not to expose it, just to keep it alive. Because if I forget, then they win. And if they ever come back, I'll know. I'll see it in their eyes. It's been 4 months now. Max sleeps better. I do too. I've started going for walks again, even at night. The woods don't scare me anymore. Not because I think it's over. I don't. But because I'm not afraid of the dark now. I know what's out there. And I know they want us quiet. Afraid. Alone. But I'm not any of those things. Not anymore. The other day, I saw a flyer in the window of the diner. Someone was putting together a community group, a place for people to talk about strange experiences, things they couldn't explain. Lights in the sky, voices in the woods. I stood there looking at it for a long time. Then I took it down. Because I don't think this is something to talk about in a circle over coffee. It's something to remember in silence, to carry with you, so that when the moment comes again, and it will, you'll recognize the stillness, the eyes, the way they don't quite move right. You'll know, and you'll walk away, just like I did. That's the ending, not a battle, not a discovery, just this. Memory and survival. Babysitting was something I never thought twice about. I had done it since I was 13, watching neighbors' kids, cousins, sometimes families I barely knew but who had gotten my number through word of mouth. By the time I was 17, it felt routine. Feed them, keep them entertained, tuck them in, and wait for the parents to come home. Easy money. That Friday night felt no different at first. The Millers called last minute, said they were in a bind. I had never sat for them before, but I recognized the name because my mom knew someone at the dad's office. Their place was on the edge of town, an older 2-story with tall windows and a steep roof. The kind of house that looks like it should be on a postcard, except when you get close you realize the paint is peeling and the porch creaks when you step on it. When I walked inside, I noticed how clean everything was. Not cozy clean, not lived in, but spotless. No toys scattered on the floor, no family photos on the walls, nothing to make it feel like kids actually lived there. The furniture looked arranged, not used. The parents greeted me at the door with stiff smiles, almost like they had practiced them. They did not bother with small talk. They just told me the kids had already eaten, bedtime was 9 sharp, and to call if I needed anything. Then they were gone. The kids were in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch. The boy was 7, lanky and serious. His little sister was 5, small and round-faced, holding a stuffed rabbit by its ear. They stared at me for a long second before the boy asked if I had paper. "Paper?" I asked. "For drawing," he said. His voice was calm, polite, like he was used to explaining himself. I dug through my bag and found a half-used sketch pad and a box of crayons. They both lit up, sliding off the couch and rushing to the kitchen table. I figured it would keep them busy for a while, so I set them up with the pad, spread the crayons out, and poured myself a glass of water. At first it was normal. The little girl hummed to herself, scribbling in red and yellow. The boy worked slower, carefully pressing lines into the paper. I scrolled on my phone, listening to the quiet scratch of crayons. When I checked their drawings, though, my stomach tightened. Both kids had drawn the same thing. Not castles or animals, but me, sitting at the kitchen table, just like I was in that moment. And behind me, in both drawings, stood a tall black figure, faceless, too long in the arms and legs, looming over my chair. I laughed awkwardly, trying to make it light. "Who's this?" I asked, tapping the shape. The girl lowered her crayon and whispered, "That's the man who lives here. He likes when you don't notice him." Before I could respond, the boy leaned across the table, shushing her sharply. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Don't turn around too fast, or he gets angry." I froze. They went back to coloring as if nothing had happened. I sat still, gripping my phone, every muscle in my neck aching from the urge to turn and check behind me. Finally, I forced a laugh. "You two have some imagination." Neither of them replied. The minutes dragged. Every time I checked their papers, the same fucking figure was there. Always behind me, sometimes close, sometimes leaning down like it was whispering. At one point I stood up and excused myself to the bathroom just so I could glance at the reflection in the mirror on the way down the hall. Nothing there. Just the living room behind me, the couch, the faint glow of the kitchen light. But when I came back, the kids had pushed a new drawing across the table, me again, and this time the figure's hand was resting on my shoulder. I told myself to stop letting it get to me. Kids draw monsters. They make things up. They test babysitters to see if they can scare them. That was all this was. Still, when the girl looked up at me and smiled faintly, it did not feel like a prank. It felt like she knew something I did not. At bedtime, I tried to shake it off. I read them a story, tucked them in, and turned off the light. The boy had taped one of his drawings above his bed, the one of me sitting on the couch with the figure in the corner of the living room. I asked why he wanted it there. "To warn you," he said. His voice was serious, too serious for a 7-year-old. Downstairs, the house seemed bigger without the kids' voices. Every creak of the old floorboards echoed louder. I cleaned up the crayons and stacked the sketch pad neatly, trying not to look at the pictures still scattered on the table. That was when the baby monitor crackled. It was not the kids. I knew what their voices sounded like, high and soft. These were lower, older, whispers that rose and fell, too faint to understand but too clear to ignore. I rushed upstairs. Both kids were asleep, breathing slow and steady. Their room was quiet, but in the hallway just outside their door, lying on the floor, was a new drawing, paper I had not given them, crayon strokes deep enough to nearly tear through. It showed me lying in the guest bed, and the tall black figure standing over me. I picked it up with shaking hands, the waxy lines smudging under my fingers. My pulse thudded in my ears. I checked the boy's desk, the girl's dresser, anywhere they might have hidden extra paper, but everything was empty. No loose sheets, no crayons out of place. When I looked back at the drawing, I noticed something I had missed at first. In the corner of the picture, scrawled in red crayon, was a single word: soon. The hallway light flickered. A floorboard creaked downstairs, and for the first time all night, I wondered if the kids' warnings were not part of a game at all. I stood there in the hallway longer than I should have, holding that drawing like it might explain itself if I stared at it hard enough. The word soon seemed heavier than crayon should allow, thick and waxy, like it had been pressed into the paper with intent. I told myself the kids must have done it earlier, before I arrived, and slipped it out as a prank. But when I glanced at the boy's room again, he was turned on his side, breathing slow and steady. The little girl clutched her rabbit, her lips parted in sleep. If they were pretending, they were far too good at it. I slipped the drawing into my pocket and backed down the stairs, telling myself not to be ridiculous. Kids make up stories. They test boundaries. They like to scare themselves. That was all. I repeated it under my breath as I walked into the kitchen. The sketch pad was still there, crayons scattered neatly across the table where I had left them. I flipped through the pages, each one showing the same thing. Me, at the table, with that figure behind me. In one, its head nearly brushed the ceiling. In another, it leaned down close to my ear. The drawings had a strange perspective, like the kids had been looking at me through another angle, seeing what I could not. I closed the pad quickly and shoved it aside. My pulse was too loud in my ears. I needed to calm down, to focus on something normal. I cleaned the kitchen again, though there was little to clean. The Millers kept everything too neat, too empty, like no one ever really used the space. The house itself was wrong in a way I could not explain. The living room had no family photos, no stacks of mail, nothing personal at all. The shelves had books, but when I pulled one down it was hollow, just a spine with blank pages glued in place. The couches looked like they had never been sat on. It felt like a set, a place designed to look lived in but never truly touched. At around 10, I sat on the couch with the remote in my hand, debating turning on the television to drown out the silence. That was when I felt it, a shift in the air, the faintest prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was standing behind me. I gripped the remote tighter and told myself not to turn. The boy's words echoed in my head. Do not turn around too fast, or he gets angry. I held still until the feeling passed. When I finally glanced back, there was nothing. Just the dimly lit kitchen, the neat table, the sketch pad waiting on the counter. The baby monitor crackled again. I jumped, fumbling with the volume. At first it was just static, low and uneven, then a sound like breathing, slow, deliberate, too heavy for either child. I crept back upstairs, every step loud in the stillness. The hallway was empty, the kids' door shut. I opened it carefully. They were still asleep, both of them unmoving. The monitor sat on the dresser, its light flickering faintly. I reached for it, and that was when I noticed the girl's stuffed rabbit lying on the floor, a few feet from the bed. I bent to pick it up, placing it back beside her. When I straightened, I caught movement in the corner of the room. Not clear, not solid, just a suggestion of something too tall, its outline faint, dissolving as soon as my eyes landed on it. I froze, gripping the edge of the dresser. My breath caught in my throat. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. I backed out of the room, closing the door quietly behind me. My heart would not slow. I wanted to call the Millers, to demand where they were, when they would be back. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number they had left. Static. No ring, no voicemail, just hissing static. I hung up, tried again. The same. I tried a different number, my mom's, just to check. It rang fine. It was only their number that would not go through. Back downstairs, I sat on the couch again, my phone in my lap. The clock ticked toward 11. I kept checking the front window, hoping to see headlights, the relief of their car pulling into the drive. Nothing. The house creaked and shifted around me, as old houses do, but each sound felt too deliberate. A floorboard settling in the kitchen, a faint thump from upstairs, the brush of air against the back of my neck when no window was open. I pulled the sketch pad toward me without meaning to. Another page had been filled in. I flipped back and forth, counting. I knew I had gone through them all earlier, but now there was a new drawing on the last sheet. It showed me standing in the hallway upstairs, the kids asleep in bed, and the tall black figure crouched low, its hands resting on the edge of their mattress. My mouth went dry. I tossed the pad onto the couch and stood quickly, my pulse racing. I needed to leave, to get the kids and walk straight out of that house. But before I could move, the garage door rumbled open. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. The parents. They were back. I waited for the sound of the car, the footsteps, the front door unlocking. But the kids' door creaked upstairs. Tiny footsteps hurried down the hall. Both of them appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide, clutching each other. "Don't let them in," the boy cried, his voice cracked with fear. "It's not really them." The front door opened before I could respond. The Millers stepped inside, smiling too wide. Their clothes were neat, their hair in place, but something about them was wrong. Too stiff, too rehearsed, like their movements had been practiced. They did not ask about the kids. They did not even look at them. Their eyes were fixed only on me. The boy's hand slipped into mine, shaking. He whispered, "That's how he tricks people." When I turned back, the hallway was empty. The door was shut. The Millers were gone. Silence pressed down on the house again. The kids stood trembling beside me, their small hands clinging to mine. And for the first time, I realized we might not make it to morning. The silence after the Millers vanished was worse than their sudden appearance. The air seemed heavier, like the house itself had closed around us. The kids would not let go of my hands. Their fingers were ice cold, trembling as though they had run through snow without coats. I led them back into the kitchen, trying to act calm, though my chest was pounding. "It's fine," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "Everything's fine." But the kitchen was not fine. On the table, where I had left the sketch pad, there were now half a dozen loose sheets of paper, crayon drawings, the same black figure over and over. In each, the figure stood closer. One showed its hand stretched out toward the back of my head. Another had it bending low, face level with mine, though the face was still blank. The lines were rushed, frantic, like they had been drawn in seconds. I turned to the kids. "Did you do this?" Both shook their heads. The boy's eyes were wide. "We were upstairs," he whispered. "We don't draw that fast." My hands shook as I gathered the papers into a pile and shoved them aside. I needed a plan. We could not sit in that house waiting for something to happen. I told them we would stay together in the living room, all three of us. I thought maybe the television would distract them, keep things normal. But when I clicked it on, the screen did not show a channel. It showed a grainy black and white feed of the kitchen from earlier, me handing the crayons to the kids, them sitting at the table. And behind me, in the corner of the frame, the figure. It was not sketched this time, not imagined. It was there, faint but visible, looming. I switched the television off so fast, the remote slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The boy whispered, "You saw him too." I forced myself to nod. Lying felt impossible now. The girl crawled into my lap, pressing her small face into my chest. "He doesn't like when you notice him," she whispered. "He wants you to act like he's not here." "Then how do we stop him?" I asked before I could stop myself. My voice cracked, desperate. The boy shook his head. "You can't stop him. You can only not make him mad." I wanted to argue, to say that was ridiculous, but the words caught in my throat. We sat in silence. The clock ticked past 11:30. My nerves were raw. Every creak of the house felt pointed, deliberate. The refrigerator's hum, the pipes shifting, the wind pressing against the old siding, all of it sounded alive. When I finally gathered the courage to move, I suggested we check that the doors were locked. We walked through the house together, my arms around both of them. Every lock was in place. The front door, the back door, even the windows, all sealed. But in the hallway by the stairs, we found another drawing lying face up on the floor. This one stopped me cold. It showed the three of us standing by the front door, holding hands. And the figure blocking the exit, its arms stretched wide, too long, like it could span the entire frame of the house. The boy bent to pick it up, but I stopped him. My hand shook as I held it instead. The lines were heavy, angry. This one had been drawn with force. I tucked it under my arm and hurried the kids into the living room again. "Stay here," I whispered, though I had no idea where I thought I was going. I crept toward the guest room where I had left my bag. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, desperate for contact with anyone. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. A picture. It was of me, sitting on the couch in the Millers' living room just seconds earlier. The kids clutched against me, and behind us, standing so close its head nearly touched the ceiling, was the figure. My legs went weak. I almost dropped the phone. I hurried back to the living room, my heart slamming against my ribs. The kids looked at me, their faces pale, their eyes filled with the kind of fear children should never know. The boy whispered, "He doesn't like when you show people. He only wants us." I shoved the phone into my pocket and sat down, pulling them close. I wanted to run, but the idea of opening the door and stepping into the night with that thing outside felt worse than staying. The girl whispered, "He doesn't like when you try to leave. He gets mad." "How do you know?" I asked. Her eyes welled with tears. "Because the last babysitter tried." I stared at her, my throat tightening. "What happened to them?" The boy answered, his voice flat. "They didn't come back." I wanted to believe it was just a story, something the kids made up, but the way he said it, calm and certain, made my skin crawl. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. The house creaked, the air thick and stale. The kids eventually dozed against me, too tired to fight it anymore. I held them both, my eyes locked on the shadows stretching across the walls. At some point, I must have closed my eyes, because the next thing I knew, the baby monitor hissed again. My head jerked up. The kids stirred, but did not wake. Through the static came a voice. Not whispers this time. A single word, low and guttural, drawn out until it distorted. "Soon." I swallowed hard, clutching the kids tighter. The living room window rattled softly. I turned toward it before I could stop myself. Outside, pressed against the glass, was the pale suggestion of a face. No features, no eyes, just smooth emptiness stretched into a grin too wide for a human mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered, "Please go, please." When I opened them again, the window was empty. But on the table where the sketchpad had been, a new drawing sat waiting. It showed me asleep on the couch. The kids gone, and the figure alone, its hands stretched across the page, as if it was finally close enough to touch. I sat frozen, staring at that last drawing on the table. The lines were jagged, frantic, pressed into the paper so hard the crayon had broken in places. My own face was sketched in profile, eyes closed, my body limp against the couch. The kids were gone from the page, erased or never drawn at all. Only the tall figure remained, its arms stretched across the edges as if it was holding the paper itself. I wanted to tear it up, to burn it, but a sick feeling in my stomach told me that destroying it would only make things worse. Instead, I slid it beneath the stack of other drawings, hiding it from view. The kids were still sleeping, their heads resting against my sides, and for a moment I thought maybe I had imagined all of it. Maybe I was just overtired, letting the creaks of an old house and the wild imaginations of children get to me. That moment of calm lasted only seconds. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to either child. Each step groaned against the old wood, dragging slightly before lifting again. They crossed the hallway, paused, then started down the stairs. I tightened my arms around the kids, trying not to wake them. My chest pounded so loudly I thought for sure it would wake the whole house. The steps drew closer, descending until they reached the landing just outside the living room. I forced myself to stand, easing the children down onto the couch. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a lamp, clutching it like a weapon. The steps stopped. The air felt thick, suffocating. I raised the lamp high, ready to swing, but when I turned toward the doorway, there was nothing. The hallway stretched out empty, shadows pooling in the corners. I lowered the lamp slowly, my hands slick with sweat. Behind me, the boy stirred. His voice was groggy but firm. "You can't fight him," he whispered. "He doesn't care about things like that. Haver do. Haver two men. Haver do 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 men." I crouched beside him. Then what does he want? The boy's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw tears welling. "He wants you to see him." The girl woke next, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "We shouldn't have drawn him," she whispered. "He only comes when we draw him too much." My throat tightened. "Then why did you keep drawing?" She shrugged, small shoulders trembling. "We don't always choose. Sometimes our hands just move." I looked at the sketch pad, the pile of drawings on the table, and felt a cold certainty settle over me. This thing was using them, their crayons, their small hands, to pull itself closer into the world. Every page was a doorway, every line a thread. The house gave another long groan, as if it understood my thoughts. I knew I could not sit there until dawn. The waiting was worse than the thought of leaving. I told the kids we were going to the car, that we were going to find someplace safer. They did not argue, but their faces fell. "He won't like it," the boy warned. The girl clutched her rabbit tight. "He doesn't like outside." Still, they followed me. I gathered my bag, shoved the sketch pad inside against my better judgment, and took both their hands. We walked carefully to the front door. Every step echoed too loudly. I felt exposed, like the walls themselves were watching. When I reached for the lock, the knob was ice cold under my palm. I twisted it, pulled the door open, and froze. The figure stood there, filling the doorway. It was taller than I imagined, its head brushing the frame, shoulders hunched unnaturally to fit. Its body was blacker than shadow, like it absorbed all the light around it. Its face was blank, smooth, except for the faint impression of a mouth curled into something like a smile. The kids whimpered and clung to my legs. I slammed the door shut, locking it again with shaking hands. My lungs burned. The boy's voice was thin with fear. "I told you. He doesn't like outside." The girl tugged my sleeve. "We have to go upstairs. It's safer when he's down here." I wanted to argue, but I had nothing left. My instincts screamed to flee, but the only exit was blocked. I scooped the girl into my arms, grabbed the boy's hand, and hurried back toward the stairs. As we climbed, the air grew heavier, pressing against us like water. The lights flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. We reached the hallway in near darkness. I pushed them into the boys' room and closed the door behind us. My phone's screen was the only light, faint and blue. I pulled it out, desperate, and tried calling again. Every number went to static, even numbers that had worked earlier. The boy sat on his bed, pulling his knees to his chest. He doesn't want you to call anyone. The girl curled against me, whispering into my shoulder. He just wants you. My stomach dropped. Why me? Neither answered. The monitor crackled to life again. At first it was the same low static. Then a voice. Not the whisper from before. Not guttural. This was a child's voice, faint but clear. It said my name. The girl shook her head violently, pressing her hands over her ears. The boy whispered, "Don't listen. That's not us." The voice repeated my name, sweeter this time, almost sing-song. Then it added, "Come downstairs, too." I turned the monitor off, heart hammering. The boy pointed at the taped drawing above his bed, the one of me sitting on the couch with the figure in the corner. His hand shook as he tapped the page. He makes things real when we draw them. But if we stop drawing him, maybe he'll go. My mind raced. Could it be that simple? If the drawings gave him shape, maybe destroying them would take it away. I pulled the sketch pad from my bag, flipping to the pages. Each one was the same figure, closer and closer. The girl reached for it with shaking hands. "He won't like that." "I don't care," I whispered. I tore a page free. The house groaned instantly, louder than before, the walls shuddering like in anger. The boy shouted, "Stop." But I had already ripped another, then another. With each tear, the air grew colder. The light from my phone flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, heavy, slow, dragging, closer with each beat. The girl screamed, clutching my arm. The boy buried his face in his knees. The doorknob began to turn. The doorknob twisted slowly, metal scraping against metal, deliberate and unhurried. I pressed my back against the door, my arms spread wide as if I could hold it shut with my own weight. The wood was cold against me, vibrating faintly with each turn of the knob. The boy whispered from the bed, "It doesn't matter if you block it. He's already inside." I clenched my jaw, refusing to look at him. "Stay quiet," I hissed. My breath fogged the air even though the room was not cold enough for that. The girl clutched her rabbit tighter, her knuckles white. The knob stilled. For a moment the only sound was the three of us breathing in the dark. Then came a knock, 3 sharp raps against the wood, so loud the door shuddered in its frame. I almost jumped out of my skin. The boy shook his head. "Don't answer." I stayed frozen. Another 3 knocks. This time softer, almost playful, followed by a long scrape down the length of the door. The sound of nails or claws dragging wood. My chest ached with every breath. I forced myself to whisper, "We can't just sit here. We need to end this." The boy's eyes shone faintly in the dark. "You can't end it. You can only survive it." I shook my head. "No, that's not good enough." I pulled the sketch pad back into my lap. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, torn edges crinkling under my fingers. Most were destroyed, ripped in half, but a few remained untouched. Each one showed me in some vulnerable position, sitting, sleeping, standing unaware, and the figure always looming. I grabbed one of the crayons and pressed it to the page. The wax squeaked under my hand. What are you doing?" the boy demanded. "If he can use these drawings to make himself real," I whispered, "then maybe I can use them too." The girl whimpered. "He won't like that." "I don't care what he likes." My hand moved fast, sketching a doorway, a rectangle with harsh lines. Then I drew the 3 of us holding hands, stepping through it. Behind us I scrawled the figure, but this time I drew it shrinking, its arms pulled inward. I pressed hard, carving the crayon into the paper like I could trap him there. The house groaned again, louder this time. The doorknob rattled violently, turning back and forth as if someone was furious outside. The girl sobbed into my shoulder. I held up the drawing. Look, I told them, desperate. We make the rules, not him. The boy did not look convinced, but his small hand reached for mine anyway. I grabbed it, then pulled the girl close with my other arm. Together we stared at the page. The air shifted. The knocking stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then, the closet door creaked open. My head snapped toward it. The faint glow from my phone's dead screen gave me just enough light to see movement inside. Tall, hunched, a shape unfolding in the darkness, like it had been waiting there all along. The figure stepped out slowly, too large for the small room, its head brushing the ceiling, its faceless face tilted toward me, blank but intent. The girl screamed. The boy pulled against my hand, but I held on tighter. I shoved the drawing toward the thing, crayon lines smudging under my grip. "Stay on the page," I whispered, my voice shaking. "That's where you belong." The figure leaned closer. The smell of damp earth filled the room, thick and suffocating. My stomach lurched. Its hand rose, long fingers stretching toward me, the tips grazing the air just above the paper. For a second I thought it worked. The lines on the page seemed to shimmer faintly, like the drawing itself was pulling him in. Then the crayon snapped in half in my grip. The figure straightened, its blank face turning slightly as if amused. The page in my hand blackened at the edges, curling with heat that came from nowhere. I dropped it with a cry, and it turned to ash before it hit the floor. The boy's voice was barely a whisper. "He makes the rules, not us." The figure stepped forward, and the walls of the room shuddered. A picture frame fell and cracked against the floor. The bed shook, the mattress trembling beneath the boy's small body. I grabbed the children and backed into the far corner, my body pressed against them as if I could shield them with my own skin. "Please," I begged. My voice broke. "Please don't." The figure stopped. It tilted its head, considering. Then it raised one long finger and pointed at me. The boy's breath hitched. "He chose you." The figure lowered its hand, turned, and slipped back into the closet. The door shut with a click, leaving the room silent once more. I collapsed to my knees, clutching the children. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold them. The girl sobbed quietly into my shoulder. The boy stared at the closet, his expression blank, resigned. "He's not gone," he whispered. "He's waiting. He always waits." I wanted to argue, to tell them we had survived, that it was over, but I could not force the words past my throat. The house was too still, too heavy, like a held breath. I kept the kids close until exhaustion finally dragged us down. I must have dozed off against the wall, because the next thing I knew, faint morning light was leaking through the curtains. The air felt lighter. The weight lifted. I shook the children gently awake. Their faces were pale, their eyes rimmed with red, but they were alive. We crept downstairs together. The house looked normal again. The sketchpad was gone from the table. The pile of drawings had vanished. The living room looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. But on the refrigerator, stuck beneath a plain magnet, was a single new drawing. It showed me, standing alone in the living room. No kids. And the figure's hand resting on my shoulder. The drawing on the refrigerator held me there longer than I care to admit. I stood in the kitchen with both children pressed against my legs, staring at the paper like it might leap from the magnet and wrap itself around my throat. The figure's black hand rested so casually on my sketched shoulder, as if it had already claimed me. The kids did not speak, did not move, just watched me watch it. When I finally pulled the page free, the magnet clattered to the floor. The wax felt damp under my fingers, like the crayon had only just been pressed to the paper. I wanted to crumple it, to tear it into shreds, but something about the weight of the house stopped me. It felt like eyes were waiting for my choice, daring me to make the wrong move. So instead, I folded the drawing neatly into quarters and slid it into my bag. The boy whispered, "He will follow you now." The girl asked, "Will you still come back?" I swallowed hard, crouching to meet their eyes. "No," I said quietly. with more honesty than I meant to share. "I will not come back here." Their faces did not change. They only nodded, as if they had known the answer already. We sat in silence until the clock in the hallway chimed 7. Pale morning light filled the windows. I gathered my bag and the children followed me to the front door. The lock clicked open easily, the knob warm beneath my palm. Outside, the street was quiet. Birds sang in the distance, the ordinary sound jarring after the night's madness. The driveway was empty. No cars, no sign the Millers had ever returned. I walked the kids to my car, opened the back door, and helped them inside. They did not argue, did not ask questions. Their small bodies slumped against the seats, eyes hollow with exhaustion. When I turned the key, the engine caught on the first try. Relief washed through me in a flood so strong I nearly sobbed. I pulled out of the driveway, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. By the time we reached the main road, the kids were asleep, their heads lolling softly against the windows. I did not know where to take them. I thought about the police, about trying to explain what happened. But what could I say? That a faceless shadow had stepped out of the walls? That crayon drawings came to life? They would think I had lost my mind. Instead, I drove them back to my own house. By the time we arrived, the kids were stirring. They followed me inside quietly, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug while I made them toast and poured juice. For a brief moment, it felt normal. 2 kids eating breakfast, cartoons playing softly on the television. My heart began to slow. Then the boy set his cup down carefully and looked at me. "You cannot keep us," he said. The girl nodded. "We belong to him." A chill ran down my spine. "No," I whispered. "You are safe here. You do not belong to anyone. It is not Redding. But the boy only shook his head. "That is not how it works." Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, perfectly spaced. My breath caught. The children did not flinch. I stood, every nerve screaming, and approached the door. Through the peephole, no one waited outside. The porch was empty. Still, I did not open it. When I turned back, the kids were gone. Their plates were empty, their cups rinsed clean and placed neatly on the counter. Only the faint smell of toast lingered. I searched the house frantically, calling their names. Every room was empty, no footprints on the carpet, no sound of movement. It was as if they had never been there at all. In the living room, resting where they had sat, was another drawing. This one showed my house, sketched in crooked lines, the windows dark. In the center was me, standing alone. Behind me, taller than the roof, was the figure. My stomach turned. I grabbed the paper, ready to tear it apart, but stopped. Something shifted at the edge of my vision. In the reflection of the darkened television screen, I saw him. Tall, faceless, his head bent low to hover just behind my shoulder. I spun, swinging the paper like it was a weapon, but the room was empty. The screen still showed him. I backed away until my legs hit the couch. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I clutched the drawing tight, crumpling it in my hand. That was when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. A new text from an unknown number. Just one image. It was me, sitting exactly where I sat now, clutching a crumpled drawing in my fist. And behind me, clear and sharp, the figure leaned down, its hand resting on my shoulder, exactly as the sketch on the refrigerator had shown. I dropped the phone, bile rising in my throat. The house was silent, too silent. And then I understood. It was never about the Millers, or the children, or the house. It was about me. The children were only bait, sketches in someone else's story, pieces to draw me in. I forced myself to smooth the crumpled drawing on the coffee table. My hands shook as I reached for a crayon that had rolled from my bag, red, blunt-tipped. I pressed it to the page and began to draw, fast and desperate. I drew the figure small this time, shrinking with each line. I drew walls around it, chains binding it, words scrawled across the page like bars. My hand cramped, wax breaking under pressure, but I did not stop until the paper was covered. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my chest. The walls groaned, the ceiling cracked faintly. The reflection in the television flickered. The figure leaned closer, then blurred, its outline smearing into static. I pressed harder, filling every inch of the page until the crayon snapped in half. The drawing was complete. Silence. The weight lifted from the room, just slightly. The air eased. The reflection in the screen showed only me. I slumped against the couch, every muscle shaking. When I dared to look at the page, the figure was still there, bound in crude lines, small and contained, for now. I folded the drawing carefully and slid it into my bag. That night, I slept with the lights on. No knocks came, no whispers from the monitor, no new drawing slid under the door. But in the morning, when I checked my bag, the folded paper was gone, and taped neatly to the inside of my front door was a new drawing. Me, sitting at my table. The figure behind me, its hand, once again, resting on my shoulder. This time, though, there was writing beneath it, shaky, in black crayon. You drew the door. We can come through yours now. I burned the paper in the sink, watched the flames curl it into ash. It does not matter, because every night since, I feel the air shift. I see the reflection change, and I know the children were right. You do not end it. You only survive it. It's weird how quickly you stop questioning things when you work night shift. I think that's the first thing I noticed after about a month. Stuff that would seem totally off during the day just blends in after midnight. People talking to themselves in the energy drink aisle. A regular customer who only buys hard-boiled eggs and lighters. The hum of the freezer that sounds like someone whispering if you stand too close. You stop blinking at it. You just scan, bag, nod, and wait for sunrise. I started working at the store because I needed something that paid better than my last job, which was delivering furniture part-time for a guy who never paid on time. I didn't think much about the overnight hours. Stockholm doesn't sleep completely, and I figured a convenience store would just mean coffee runs and the occasional drunk guy looking for snacks. For the most part, that's what it was. Until I noticed the man in aisle 4. The first time I saw him, it was around 3 in the morning, more specifically, 3:08. I only remember the time because I looked up at the clock wondering why the front door hadn't beeped. That chime always goes off when someone walks in, even if they just crack the door a little. It's annoying but helpful. This time it didn't beep. I looked up and there he was. Middle-aged, average height, wearing an old gray jacket, jeans that looked stiff from years of wear, and a knitted cap pulled too low over his forehead. I couldn't see his eyes clearly. He was standing still at the end of aisle 4, the cleaning supplies and canned food section, just standing, not browsing, not shifting his weight. Just there, facing the shelves like he was trying to remember what he came in for. I assumed he'd wandered in quietly. Maybe the chime glitched. It happens. I didn't approach him. He didn't look threatening, just out of place. I gave him a few minutes, then turned to restock behind the counter. When I looked back up 5 minutes later, he was gone. No beep on the way out either. I chalked it up to being tired. Those hours warp your brain. I went back to work and didn't think about it again until 2 nights later. Same thing. 3:08. He was just there. Same spot, same clothes, same position, facing aisle 4. This time I kept my eyes on him longer. I watched him stand there for at least 7 or 8 minutes. Then I looked down to scan something for a customer, and when I looked back, he was gone again. No chime, no door opening, nothing. That made my chest feel tight, not panic, just that quiet pressure that tells you something's off and your body noticed it before your brain did. I pulled up the security feed after my shift, just to see if maybe the motion sensor or the chime was busted. That's when it got weirder. The footage showed him arriving right on time, 3:08. Frame by frame, you could see him appear just past the soda display, turning slowly into aisle 4. No footsteps, no entry. He didn't come through the door. The video jumped slightly between 2 frames, and he was just there, like the system dropped a second or 2 of footage. I fast-forwarded to when I looked away. One moment he was standing still. The next, the feed flickered just a slight distortion, and he was gone. I saved the clip. I even showed it to the manager the next day. She gave me this tight little smile and said, "Yeah, he's been doing that for years." Like it was normal. Like I had just noticed a weird clock that always chimed at the same time but nobody heard anymore. She told me other employees had brought it up too. Always around 3:08, always aisle 4, always the same man. Some of them thought it was a prank, some thought it was a glitch in the system. One guy swore it was a ghost and refused to work past midnight again. That guy quit last winter. The manager just shrugged it off, said we're 24 hours. Weird stuff happens. I started looking through old footage when it was slow, pulled files from before I even worked there. I figured it would be once or twice, maybe a coincidence, maybe a loop that played when the system glitched. But it wasn't. He was there almost every night, 3:08, without fail, always in the same position, never touching anything, just staring at the shelf like he'd lost something and was waiting for it to come back. Some nights, the footage jumped right before he appeared. Other nights, it didn't. Once, the timestamp rolled back by a second. Just a little skip, nothing dramatic. But always the same presence, like he was tied to that space, and the hour itself was the key that unlocked him. After about 2 weeks of this, I started feeling different when he showed up. Not afraid, just unsettled in a way I couldn't explain. Like the room went cold without the temperature changing. Like I could hear something vibrating just beyond what I could actually hear. One night, I tried walking down the aisle while he was there. I didn't make it far. My legs just locked up. And he turned. Just a little. Just enough to show me the side of his face. He wasn't looking at the shelves at all. He was waiting. And I swear, he smiled. Just a fraction of one, but it was there. I didn't go near him again. Not for a while. I didn't talk to him for a long time after that night. I know that sounds weak, but I need you to understand something. When you work alone during the dead hours, you learn to ignore a lot. Not because you don't care, but because noticing too much makes things worse. It opens the door wider. You start hearing things in the fridge motor, reading faces on the cereal boxes. I figured if I could just leave him alone, maybe he'd do the same. But ignoring him didn't help. If anything, it started to feel like that was exactly what he wanted. Every night at 3:08, he came back. Same clothes, same silence, same aisle. I tried not to look at him directly, but I could feel him. I could feel the shift in the air every time. I could be halfway across the store, restocking gum or mopping the floor, and the second he arrived, it was like something in the air turned still and tight. like the entire building was holding its breath until he left. I don't know when I started seeing him out of the corner of my eye at other times. I'd be on the tram home, just as the sky started to lighten, and I'd swear I saw the same gray jacket reflected in the window behind me. Or I'd be walking to the store for my shift and see someone turn a corner up ahead with the same stiff walk, the same low cap. I'd blink and they'd be gone. I told myself I was tired, that the hours were catching up to me, but that didn't explain what I found on the footage one night. It was slow. Around 2:45 in the morning, I was bored and the store was quiet, so I skimmed back through the feed just to see if he'd appeared yet. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a frame skip around 2 minutes earlier than usual. At 3:06, there was a flash of static fast, barely a blink, and then his reflection was already there, in the fridge door. Only the fridge was closed. No chime. No motion near the entrance. Just a reflection of a man who hadn't entered yet, standing in aisle 4 as if he'd already arrived. That messed with my head. It meant he wasn't walking in. He was being placed. Like the system didn't capture his arrival, because there was no arrival to capture. He was just suddenly there, like a save point loading in a game. Like he had always been in aisle 4, and the camera just needed to remember it. After that, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The idea that he was standing there every night, unnoticed by most people, just waiting for something, made my skin crawl. I started asking questions around the neighborhood, not obvious ones. Just casual things, like whether anyone else came to the store late, whether anyone remembered a man who always walked in without buying anything. Most people hadn't seen him. One guy, a retired security guard, said the man had been around when he was still working patrol in the area. Said he'd always found him strange but harmless. Then he told me something I wasn't ready for. He said the man used to come to the store when it was a different brand, back when it was still family-owned. That was over 15 years ago. He said the guy looked exactly the same. I asked if maybe it was his memory playing tricks, that maybe it was just a similar-looking guy. He shook his head. Said he remembered the clothes, the posture. Said the man never changed. That did it for me. That night, I waited. I didn't even pretend to be busy. I stood behind the counter, arms crossed, eyes on the door, until the clock hit 3:08. No chime. But there he was. Not appearing, not exactly, but turning, slowly, into aisle 4 like he had taken a step from some place just outside of time. Like he had been waiting to align with the moment. I walked toward him before I could talk myself out of it. My throat was dry, my palms were slick, but I moved anyway, slow steps, steady breath. When I reached the edge of the aisle, I stopped. He didn't turn. He didn't move. I said quietly, "Can I help you with something?" "Nothing." The silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. He wasn't ignoring me. He was listening. I tried again. "You're here every night. You never buy anything, are you? Looking for something?" Still nothing. I stepped closer. That's when he turned. Not fast, just a slow, deliberate rotation. His body pivoted like his feet hadn't moved in 100 years. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw them clearly. They weren't empty. They were tired. He looked at me for a long time, then he opened his mouth. His voice was dry, like paper burning at the edges. "I'm waiting for my receipt." That's all he said. Not angry, not confused. Just waiting. I didn't know what to say. I stood there, frozen, watching him like he was something half-remembered from a dream I never wanted to finish. Before I could speak again, he turned back to the shelf. And then he was gone. Not vanished. Just not there anymore. No flicker. No exit. Just absence. I couldn't get that sentence out of my head. I'm waiting for my receipt. It didn't sound like a threat. It didn't even sound like a question. It was more like a statement of fact. Something you'd say when time doesn't move for you the way it moves for everyone else. That's what really stuck with me, the calm in his voice. Like he wasn't trapped, but resigned. Like he already knew what I was going to do next, and had been waiting for it all along. I didn't tell my manager. She wouldn't have cared. She treated everything in the store like static on a radio background noise. Anything that didn't cause a fire or get the police involved was ignored. "That's how you survive working nights," she once told me. "You tune it out," but I couldn't tune it out anymore. Not after looking him in the eye, not after hearing him speak. It was the kind of moment that rewired something behind your ribs, made the hours between midnight and morning feel like a place you could get stuck in if you weren't careful. I started researching the store. Not online, there wasn't much there except a handful of low-star reviews and a local article about how it used to be an old pharmacy in the 1970s. Instead, I went down the road to the city archives. Stockholm keeps a decent record of business licenses and property ownership, even going back over 50 years. I told the clerk I was doing a university project on commercial development in residential districts. She gave me a tired smile and pointed me toward the public terminals. No one else was in there. The whole place smelled like dust and dried glue. I sat down and typed in the address. The store had changed names 6 times. Started as a grocer, then a drugstore, then a convenience kiosk, then something called Vickland's Sundries, which didn't last long, then a 24-hour mart, then the current chain I worked for. The shift to 24 hours happened in the early 1990s. That matched what the retired security guard said, so I kept digging. Looked for incident reports, insurance claims, old news bulletins. Most of it was boring. Shoplifting, water damage, minor electrical fires. But then I found something different. A small scanned notice buried in the city records, dated February of 1998. A fatal accident reported at the store. 1 customer dead. No criminal charges filed. The report was vague. No photo, no full names. Just a line saying a man collapsed between aisles 3 and 4 at approximately 3:10 in the morning. The file listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest. The employee on duty had called emergency services, but the man was already gone when the paramedics arrived. There was one sentence at the end of the report that gave me chills. Customer collapsed while speaking to clerk, asking about a receipt that never printed. I sat there staring at the screen. The dates, the time, the phrasing, it all lined up. I went back through the system, looked for death records that matched. Eventually I found it. Johann Melberg, age 46, died in February of 1998, lived nearby. Worked as a taxi driver. I didn't know what I expected to feel, maybe a rush of clarity, maybe fear, but what I actually felt was guilt, like I had already failed him. Like the moment he looked at me and said he was waiting for something, he had hoped I would know how to help, and instead I stood there frozen, useless, watching him vanish again. That night, I came in early for my shift. I printed out a copy of the death report and folded it into my pocket, not because I thought I'd show him, just because I didn't want to be the only one who remembered him. If he had been walking into the store at the same time every night for over 20 years, someone should remember his name. When 3:08 rolled around, he appeared again. Same place, same angle, aisle 4. This time, I walked toward him without hesitation. I didn't speak right away. I just stood near the edge of the aisle and waited. He turned to face me slowly, like he always did, the cap low over his brow. That same old jacket, sleeves too long, but there was something different in his eyes this time. Recognition, maybe. Or something close to relief. I said his name. He didn't react. I said it again. Johann. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. His eyes locked onto mine, and I swear, for just a second, it looked like he was about to cry. I reached into my pocket, unfolded the paper, and held it out. I know what happened, I said. You collapsed here, asking for a receipt. He looked down at the paper but didn't take it. Then he said, quietly, "They told me it was free." That didn't make sense. I asked what he meant. He shook his head, like the words weren't translating properly anymore. I paid, but the receipt never came. You understand? I said I thought I did. He looked toward the counter, then back at me. I just want to go home. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't give him a receipt for something that happened before I worked there, before the register was even the same, but something in my chest told me that wasn't the point. He didn't need the actual receipt. He needed someone to see him, to acknowledge that he'd been left waiting too long. So I went behind the counter. I typed his name into the register as if it were a product. I printed a blank slip with the words "Paid in full" typed across the middle. I brought it to him and held it out. He took it. For the first time, his hands moved. He looked down at the slip, then looked at me, and nodded. I should have been scared when he took the receipt. That's what I expected, a burst of static, lights flickering, something cracking open and making it clear that I'd just crossed a line. But it wasn't like that at all. When his fingers touched the paper, it was quiet, softer than I expected, no fanfare, just a nod. Just a weight being lifted from the air around us like pressure leaving a sealed room. He folded the receipt slowly, precisely, like it mattered, like it was the only thing that ever had. Then he turned toward the front of the store. Not fast, not like he'd been waiting to escape, but calm, decided. I stepped back and let him pass. And this time he walked. That alone was enough to make my heart feel like it skipped a beat. I'd never seen him move past aisle 4. Never seen his feet touch the tiles near the register. He moved like he had always known the layout of the place, like the shelves had been built around him. As he passed, I felt the hair on my arms lift, not from cold, from recognition. Like something old was leaving, and the building didn't quite know how to let it go. He reached the door. It opened before he touched it. No chime, no beep, just a smooth parting of glass and wind. And then he stepped out into the street and vanished into the dark. He didn't dissolve, didn't flicker. He just walked into the night and became part of it. I stood behind the counter, holding my breath like I was waiting to wake up. I watched the seconds tick past. 3:12, 3:15. No one else came in. No sound but the buzz of the lights and the hum of the fridge. I didn't feel afraid. I felt still, like something had clicked into place that had been off for too long. For the rest of my shift, I watched the door out of habit, but it stayed closed, and at 3:08 the next night nothing happened. No man, no shadow, just silence. He was gone. I should have felt relieved, but something about it made me uneasy, not in a bad way, just unsettled, like watching the last scene of a film that doesn't end with a clear answer. You know it's over, but your brain keeps waiting for another line, another frame. I pulled the footage from the security system the next morning, just to be sure. The camera showed it clearly. He appeared in aisle 4 at exactly 3:08. I walked over, handed him the slip. He took it, walked toward the door, exited the building, and the camera froze. Only for a second, maybe 2. But when the feed resumed, the timestamp had rolled back. 3:06, and there was no one in the aisle. No me, no him. Just static silence. I sat back from the monitor and rubbed my eyes. When I checked the next night's footage, the night after he was gone, something else had changed. The shelf in aisle 4 looked different. I zoomed in. Hard to tell at first, but the labels were wrong. The products were the same, but the spacing was off, like the shelf had shifted somehow. Like something had been pushed into it from the other side, not recently, over time. I didn't want to admit what I was thinking. That maybe the aisle hadn't just hosted him. Maybe it had been part of him. A loop, a holding space. And now that it was empty, it didn't know what to do with itself. Over the next few nights, I noticed more strange things. One of the freezer doors refused to stay shut. It would slowly drift open around 3 in the morning, pause, then close itself by 3:20. The register rang up a phantom item once a line with no barcode, no name, just the word cleared and a total of 0 kroner. Customers started mentioning odd dreams. Not directly, but in passing. One woman said she kept dreaming about forgetting something important, but not knowing what. Another said he kept seeing someone standing at the edge of his hallway at night, not moving, just waiting. I asked if he recognized the face. He said no. But when I showed him a still frame from the old footage, he didn't speak. Just nodded once and left without buying anything. That's when I started wondering if I'd made a mistake. Not by helping him, but by assuming he was the only one. Because the stillness in the store didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment after a sound stops and before the next one starts. A pause. And I realized maybe he hadn't been trapped there. Maybe he had been keeping something else out. Maybe that aisle wasn't a prison. Maybe it was a lock. And I just handed him the key. The nights felt longer after he left. I don't know how else to describe it. Time didn't stretch in a literal sense, but something in the rhythm had shifted. The store used to breathe in patterns: door chime, footsteps, register beeps, silence. Then again, a loop, steady enough that you could fall into it and forget you were even awake. But now, the space between those moments grew wider, like the walls were listening more closely, like something was waiting to decide what it wanted to do next. Customers came and went like usual during the early part of the night, but once the clock crept past 2, the air turned thick again. Not cold, not warm, just still. Every sound felt louder. The mop bucket squeaked. The lights buzzed louder than they should. Even the hum of the refrigerated cases had a strange edge to it, like something was caught in the fan but never quite hit the blade. And then there was aisle 4. I stopped going down there. I'd restock every other aisle, sweep around it, wipe down shelves, and pretend not to notice that nothing ever fell out of place there. I would watch it from the corner of my eye. I kept expecting to see him, Johann, step back into frame like he'd forgotten something, but he didn't, not once. That space stayed empty, but it never felt unoccupied. One night, maybe 3 days after he left, I noticed a new customer. Young woman, mid-20s maybe, long coat, thick scarf, heavy boots, like she'd been walking for a while. She came in around 3:15. I'd just finished stacking cigarettes behind the counter. I looked up, ready to give the usual polite nod, and she stopped short about halfway into the store. Not because of me, because of something else. She turned her head toward aisle 4, and her whole body tensed. I watched her eyes narrow, her breath catch, like she recognized something she couldn't quite see, but still felt. She didn't move for almost a full minute. Then she shook her head, forced a smile, and walked toward the back cooler. She never bought anything. After a few minutes, she left without speaking. The next night, another customer did almost the same thing, this time a guy in a delivery uniform. Same freeze, same glance toward aisle 4, same half-finished gesture like he was about to say something and then decided not to. It kept happening. Not every person. Just some. The kind of people who seemed tired in the deep way, the way that comes from being close to something for too long, the way I felt before Johann left. And I started thinking maybe I hadn't set him free. Maybe I'd made room, because aisle 4 didn't stay silent. I heard the first sound 5 days later. A creak. Not loud. Just a shift in the shelf, like something inside it had settled too far to the left. I thought it was my imagination until I heard it again the next night. And then again, always around 3:10. Always in aisle 4. Then the lights started flickering just in that aisle. One night the bulbs in the ceiling above it buzzed louder than usual, then popped one after the other until all 4 were out. The rest of the store was fine. I didn't report it. I didn't want anyone coming to fix it. I didn't want anyone else in there. The footage showed nothing. No shadow. No figure. Just subtle changes, products shifting slightly between frames, labels turned inward, a small can rolling off the shelf and landing upright without bouncing. I watched one clip over and over again. It was from 2 nights ago. The camera above aisle 4 glitched for a split second, and then on the top shelf a crack appeared, not in the wall, not in the shelving, in the space itself. A thin, dark line like a tear in the footage. It vanished the next frame. But I saw it. I saw it. And it wasn't the shape of a shelf breaking. It was the shape of a door. That night I locked the entrance an hour early. I turned off half the lights, sat behind the counter with every camera feed on screen. At 3:08 exactly, the store went quiet. No sound, no movement. Then aisle 4 flickered. Once, then again. Then the camera cut to static. All other feeds stayed live. Only that aisle went dark. For 37 seconds. When the feed returned, the shelf was empty. No products. Just bare metal and one thing placed in the middle of the floor. A receipt. Real, tangible. I walked over slowly. My legs felt numb, like my body already knew this was a mistake. The receipt was blank at first, but as I picked it up, ink bled across the paper, one letter at a time. It didn't say paid. It didn't say cleared. It said waiting, and it was addressed to me. The receipt stayed in my pocket for 2 days before I showed it to anyone. I didn't mean to hide it. I just didn't know what it was yet. Every time I looked at it, the word felt different. Waiting. One day it looked like a reminder. The next, it felt like a threat. Like something passive at first glance, but with weight behind it, like a held breath. It was printed on the same thermal paper we use at the register, curled slightly at the edges, still warm when I picked it up, but no sale record matched, no transaction number. Just my name, the time, and that one word. Waiting. I kept working my shifts. I had to. The store didn't stop running just because something strange had slipped through. Customers still needed cigarettes, and canned soup and chocolate milk at 3 in the morning. And most of them had no idea what had changed. But I knew, and aisle 4 knew too. Every night since Johann disappeared, it had stayed dark. I replaced the bulbs. They blew again within hours. The new products I stocked would slide off the shelf by morning. Nothing violent. Just deliberate, like someone pushing them off slowly, letting them fall as a way of saying no. This shelf is not yours anymore. The cameras kept shorting out, only in that aisle. Always for the same length of time, just long enough for something to step through and not be seen. The air in the store changed too. It didn't feel haunted exactly. That's too dramatic. It felt expectant, like something had been promised and was now watching the door for it to arrive. The word on the receipt became clearer with each passing night. It wasn't a message. It was a cue. I started having dreams. Always around the same time, I'd see myself standing in the aisle, behind the register, or sometimes just outside in the street, looking through the glass. But inside, the store was wrong. The lights were off, except for the one above aisle 4, and that aisle was filled with people. But none of them were moving. They were all waiting. Some I recognized, a few I didn't. Some wore old coats that looked like they hadn't been manufactured in 20 years. One had a uniform from the pharmacy that used to be here in the 1970s. All of them were holding receipts, and all of them were facing the same shelf. But there was nothing on it. Not products, not bags, just the wall. Blank, empty. Except for a small hole in the plaster near the bottom. Every time I woke up, I'd find the receipt had moved. It would be out of my pocket, on the counter, by the till. Once, it was tucked into the front door, sticking out just enough to be seen from the street. The message never changed. Waiting. On the 6th night, I stopped trying to make sense of it and did the only thing I hadn't tried. I opened the receipt drawer manually, printed a blank slip, and typed the words that had haunted me since the beginning. Thank you for waiting. You may go. I printed 2 copies, folded them both. I left one in aisle 4, right in the center of the floor. The second one I held on to, and I waited. 3:08 came and went. Nothing changed. No shift in the lights, no static on the cameras. But the next morning, the slip I left was gone. And for the first time in weeks, the shelf was undisturbed. That's when I started printing more. Each night, I typed a name into the system. Some of them I had learned from records, like Johann. Others came from old employee logs, newspaper clippings, or rumors. One from a note I found wedged behind the safe that just said, "Tell her I didn't forget." Every receipt I printed said the same thing. Thank you for waiting. You may go. And every night, I left one in aisle 4. And every morning, it was gone. I don't know where they went, or who took them, but something changed. The lights stopped flickering. The camera stayed steady. The products stayed on the shelf. Aisle 4 was still strange. It always would be. But it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a room that had finally been acknowledged, like it had waited long enough and been heard. I stayed at the store another 6 months. I kept printing those slips, one every night. I don't know how many were needed. Maybe there's no limit. Maybe some part of this city will always be waiting for someone to remember it. But the feeling in the air changed. The store stopped watching. One night, I got a new receipt. It wasn't typed by me. It was already in the drawer when I opened it. Folded. Warm. It had my name on it. And beneath that, one sentence. You may go. So I did. I gave my notice the next day. The manager didn't ask why. She just nodded, like she'd seen this before. I walked out of the store at sunrise. The streets were quiet. No shadows in the window. Just my reflection, small and tired, walking away. I never went back. I still think about Johann sometimes, the way he stood so still, the weight in his voice when he said he was waiting. I wonder how many people pass through places like that without anyone noticing. I wonder how many places are just holding points, quiet corners of the world where unfinished moments gather until someone takes the time to look. I keep that final receipt in my wallet. It's fading now, but the words are still there. You may go. And that's all I ever needed.